Welcome to the Mom Spectrum, where each week moms share their stories about motherhood, careers, and finding fulfillment. This show is to help moms feel more confident, because there are a million right ways to be a mom. I am your host, Stephanie Schindler. Today I have Catherine Jarvis, and I'm so excited to hear her story and have her share it with all of you. So she is the first person I talked to when I got to Montreal, and she has been a huge help, and she hosted us at our first Canadian Thanksgiving dinner. So Catherine, will you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. It's always fun to try to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And try to figure out what you can say in just a few brief seconds that will kind of capture who you are. Well, I'll just start like this. My name is Catherine Jarvis, and I am a physician and a mother and a communications director in our church congregations. I love doing interfaith work, and I spend some of my kind of extra time doing that. I am the mother of 4 children, and they've come to, we've created our family in kind of an unusual and interesting way. We adopted our oldest daughter and then had twins with fertility treatment help, and then are now fostering our youngest. So we've kind of created, my husband and I have created our family in all the possible kind of ways you can do that. So that's something kind of, I think, interesting about our family.
Great. Okay, so I want to ask you just, and we'll go more into it as we go, but I just want to ask you to share your mom journey.
I've wanted to be a mother since a very young age. My mother tells a very funny story of me at the age of 5 when she brought home my younger sister. And my mother, I was the 5th of 8 children. So by the time my sister came along, my mother had mothered a lot of children. And my sister that's just younger than me, she had not been able to spend as much time with that baby as she'd wanted to. And one day she was giving my younger sister a bath, and I came into the bathroom and basically elbowed her out of the way because I wanted to do the bath of the baby. Yeah. So I think that desire to kind of take care of children was there from a really young age. So having said that, I really did love children. I mean, I started babysitting at the age of 11, 12. I always knew I'd want my own children and really enjoyed being with children. But at the same time, about the age of 12, I recognized that I had an aptitude in science, and I really loved it. I loved biology and found it just completely fascinating. So in grade 7, I had the first inkling or thought that I wanted to be a doctor. Now, it's kind of interesting, if I look back at that time now, that I felt a little bit of conflict. I felt a little conflict there about those two desires. Mm-hmm. And I think it was probably partly a cultural issue. I mean, I was raised in a very traditional Mormon culture, and women tended to stay home with their children. And I didn't have a lot of role models of mothers who had worked. My own mother had decided after she had her first child to stay home and raise her children. So that was kind of the model I had. But I also had a very interesting mother who didn't want that to be the only model for her daughters, and she was very encouraging. She wanted us to get an education. She wanted us to go to school. She wanted us to follow our dream. So she knew that I wanted to do that around, grade 7. And she was very encouraging. She told me, you can do this. She encouraged me, wanted me to pursue that and never had an inkling of discouragement from her about that issue. But having said that, still you live in a greater cultural community, and there was a lot of expectation and pressure that girls could get an education, but once they have their children like that, the model was to stay home. I felt really lucky as a teenager that I did have some exceptional role models in my church congregation who were working women. And there was basically 2. These 2 women were not married. They were single women, but they had gone on to do PhDs in nursing and were teaching at the university near our home. Their names were Lorraine Wright and Wendy Watson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they were very dynamic and wonderful women, and I really admired them. And I think I kind of looked to them as a model of the educational piece, like that you could get an education and do something. Although they didn't also, they weren't married and didn't have their own children to model the part of mothering and working. But I really did admire them. And they were also very kind of supportive of the young women in our ward, our church congregation, towards that. So I felt very lucky for that. So fast forward a bit. So I did go to university and finished a degree in science. And around the middle of that degree, decided to apply to medical school. And the first time I applied, after I'd finished 2 years of university, I didn't get even an interview. They said I was short on a credit, and so they wouldn't even review the application. And I was super discouraged. I felt really, kind of set me back about a year. I just got so discouraged and thought, oh, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm not going to make it. And went forward a bit, thought of some other options, but decided I was going to try one more time. So after the end of my degree, applied to medical school and got accepted. So was just so thrilled. And really, during that period of time it's a period of time when you're looking for a life partner and you're dating and doing all these fun things, and really wasn't finding anybody that was a match for me. And so I just figured I was going to be like single and go off to medical school and finish this and work. So that was kind of my intention. I'll stop here for a little interjection of a story, because just for the cultural piece of some of the pressures that I think we inadvertently put on young women in our congregations or in more traditional cultural groups. So I got accepted into medical school, and of course I was thrilled and told some of my friends, thinking that they would be really pleased and excited for me and supportive. And in fact, had a very strange response from one of the mothers of a friend who said to me, probably not in these words, but whatever she said, this is what I took from it was, you know that you're taking a spot from a man who needs that spot to raise a family. And I was just like kind of stunned, because I thought, whoa, at that age, you kind of think about those things and you put it in your head, like, am I doing something bad, like wrong here? Am I doing something bad? And of course it was crazy. And it was kind of, I guess the reason I tell that story is just a reminder to all of us as women that, like, how important it is for us just to be accepting of everyone's journey and everyone's decisions that they make, because we can't, it's hard to judge somebody else's decision, why they're taking a certain path in their life and what's leading them there. It's easy to criticize and judge, and I think we have to be so careful to be supportive and just recognize that there is diversity and that we need to be open up more space for women to do whatever is in their heart to do. Right. So anyway, fast forward a bit more. So there I go off to medical school. I moved away from my home where I was raised in Calgary, Alberta, and went to Edmonton to go to medical school. And really, honestly, had the thought when I left for school, okay, this is the beginning of a different journey, and closing the door on a family journey and thinking of more just a career journey. And then things just, your life changes often, right? You just don't, things happen and you have to reassess and make new decisions based on new experiences. Anyway, on the very first day of medical school, I met my husband, and he was a classmate in my medical school class. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and we became friends really quickly, enjoyed each other's company a lot, and took us a little while to figure it out. But really, within 2 years, we got married and finished medical school together. Wasn't what I expected. So anyway, my husband and I got married in the middle of medical school. We decided we were both going to finish residency, but suddenly I had decisions to make, because we knew we wanted to have children. Both of us did. And we were trying to negotiate that and figure out like how and when and where will we do that. So in my head, I knew that it would be very challenging. We got accepted in residency in Montreal. We were far from our families, and I knew that it was unlikely that we could really, it would be difficult to have a child in the middle of residency, but at the same time, there was the ability to have maternity leave during residency and be paid. So I thought, okay, this is the time. Before even getting to residency, I guess there was another huge question that I had to ask myself, and that was what kind of residency I was going to do, because short ones might take 2 years, family medicine, but I also really loved obstetrics and pediatrics, and those residencies were 5 years. Wow, and it was a huge difference. Yeah, and it was a big decision to make. I mean, it was just an interesting process to go through to kind of balance like my desires to have a family and how was I going to negotiate that with the career and what would that look like. Ultimately, I made the decision to do family medicine, which was shorter, and really took that trajectory because I wanted to have a family and felt like that was maybe my best option for doing that. But it was closing a door, and it was a little, I mean, I think that was hard. Making that decision was difficult. And I did feel kind of a loss of kind of having to close that door, but it was really in my head, like trying to think through how do I balance these two things I love and want. So that's what I did. And it was a great decision in the end, because in family medicine, I've been able to do both those things, do some obstetrics and do some pediatrics as part of family medicine. So ultimately, it was a really great decision I made, but at the time was a challenging one to make.
For sure.
So what happened after that? We came out here and my husband and I started in residencies, and we decided after about a year that we were going to stop, trying to prevent a family and just let things happen and see if we could start our own family. And interestingly for us, we soon discovered that we had challenges, that we had fertility issues, and that we weren't having children in an easy way. And that came with its own kind of challenges, but at the same time also kind of blasted open a pathway that there was no children coming. And so we had challenges having children, and decided eventually to try to do fertility treatments to see if we could get pregnant. And that was not working. And it was difficult, and that was a challenging time. Finally, we decided, okay, maybe we'll stop. Maybe we'll put our names in for adoption. So we tried that for a period of time and had an adoption opportunity open up, but then it didn't work out. So that was also like very painful. Yeah. And so then we decided, okay, we'll go back to fertility treatments. And so we went back to fertility treatments and thought, well, we'll still leave our file open for adoption and we'll see what happens. But nothing was really on the horizon. So it was just kind of a long wait. And I think for those people struggling with infertility, you're in a weird place. And anyway, as part of a work journey, I guess that was in some ways simple, because we were just trying our best to have a family and my career was just moving forward. Finally, we decided to do another treatment. We decided to try in vitro fertilization. On the very last day of our treatment, I jokingly said to my husband, okay, now, we've transferred these embryos and we're going to get a call for adoption. And then we laughed. We thought that was pretty funny. And in fact, actually at the end of the week, we got a phone call that there was a couple who'd chosen us to adopt their child. A young woman had chosen us. And so it was kind of almost hilarious in a way, but so we had to make another decision. Way, I imagine. Yeah, we had to make another decision, right? Like every day, I just feel like my life, you get to these decision points and then you just have to make the best decision you can at the moment, and it leads you in a direction. So the decision at that moment was, were we going to go ahead and go for the adoption, or were we going to say no because we're in the middle of this fertility treatment? Right. Well, we've been trying to have children for so long that it just didn't make any sense not to go for the sure thing. And we said, okay, we have no idea if this IVF treatment will work. We're going to just put our names forward and say, yes, we'll adopt this baby. So we did, and the baby wasn't born yet. So she was, the young woman was about 7.5 months pregnant, and this was like October, and she was expecting in December. And we had just done this IVF transfer and wouldn't really know if it worked till into November. And so we just said, whatever, this is beyond our control and not in our hands, and we'll just move forward. So we did. And by the middle of November, I knew I was pregnant, not with twins, but I knew I was pregnant. And Katie, our oldest daughter, wasn't born yet, but was like days away from being born. And I got really sick from being pregnant. And of course, that made them worry right away that perhaps it was not just a single pregnancy. And so by early December, we knew we were having twins. And then Katie was born. We flew out to Alberta, where Katie was born, and we went down there and met her and picked her up at the hospital, and still didn't know if the IVF, still didn't know. We were just very few weeks into a pregnancy if it would work out, but just kind of moved forward with hope that whatever would, that the best possible outcomes could happen. So that's my very exciting journey into motherhood. So we picked up our oldest daughter at the hospital in early December, eventually brought her back to Montreal by January. And then in January or February, I started to get sick again and ended up on bed rest. So we had this newborn baby at home, and I was pregnant with twins on bed rest. It was probably the worst of all possible scenarios. The funny thing is, looking back now, it was total chaos, but we were so happy. We were so happy to just have this family that we'd always wanted, and we didn't really care. Like the craziness of how it was coming together, we just were so delighted. So we got a lot of help from our family, and I stayed in bed for 17 weeks, and we had this 2-3 month old baby, and our family just came out in rotations and would take care of her in the day, and Eric would take care of her at night, and I would stay in bed, and we'd play on the bed and do all the things you could do but on bed rest, and did that until June, when the twins decided to make an early appearance. So our oldest daughter was 1 day less than 6 months when Thomas and Rebecca, our twins, were born. So that was a whole other adventure. So we had these 3 babies, but not really the same age. So a 6-month-old and then newborn premature twins. So that's how that...
Even harder than actual triplets.
Yeah, probably, because they're just on little different trajectories, So there's about 3 years of my life that's kind of blurry.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But we were super lucky. Really. Yeah. So you can imagine during this period of time that I had this career going kind of full steam, and then really on a dime, we got a phone call on a Friday that Katie was born, and I basically called my clinic and said, I'm leaving, and maybe I'll see you in a year. We'll see how it's going. So I quit work and stayed home, and I didn't go back to work. I just couldn't function work at that time because the work I was doing was work at home, and it was intense work and meaningful work, but lonely work too.
Yeah.
I think it's something we don't talk about much with new moms, that how that dramatic change from being part of a community and working or studying, and then suddenly being home and really being with another human being who needs you, but not having conversation and not having kind of intellectual stimulation or social stimulation. That's hard. I was really lucky because in a way we couldn't survive alone. We had a lot of help, and we were able to hire help to come in. So I often did have somebody else in the house, but really our focus was baby care,
right?
Intense baby care. Anyway, I stayed home for about 18 months without working. And after 18 months, I recognized that my brain felt like it was turning to mush a bit, that I was forgetting things that I needed to know as a physician, and that I really needed to get back into the milieu a little bit. But that was another hard junction, hard decisions again. Do you go back to work? Do you decide to stay home? Do you try to balance that? Do you do a little bit of home and a little bit of work? And I just, wow, I wish I would have had some more mentors at that time, like to have shown me the possibilities, because I really did struggle with, like, is this the right decision? Should I be leaving my kids? You know, what if I don't go back to work? What's going to happen to my career? Will I get so far away that I won't be competent and I won't be able to go back to work? So just like that struggle, it's real. And it was hard. But eventually I decided that I really needed to do that. I needed to go back, and that it would be good for my brain, and it would also, that I could do it and still be the kind of present parent that I wanted to be. So we had help, which is why I could do that. And we had a young woman who we had her come, and she was sort of like our nanny help. And I don't want to call her a nanny, because like she really filled the role of, like, I mean, she was the do everything person, right? So she came and she would watch the kids, and then I could just step out the door and go to work for 5 or 6 hours, and then come back home, and she'd kind of man the kids here and clean up, maybe get some snacks or dinner ready. She was amazing, and because of that, I could do that. Yeah, and I think sometimes the people who do that work are not recognized for the important role they play, because honestly, I could not have survived without her help. I could not have done that. And people often say, they kind of have an idea of how your life is, but they don't recognize the people that sustain and support you in those decisions, you know? Yeah. So I felt grateful for that. Anyway, we had help, so I started back to work. So 18 months after these 3 kids join our family, then we have, I go back to work one day, and quite frankly, from that time until now, I've always worked a little bit, but always part-time. Mm-hmm. And I have slowly, over basically 20 years, increased from 1 day a week to now 4 or 5 days a week. And it's looked different at different times in my life. And I think that's also an interesting thing, that just that we should be maybe more vocal or aware about working women, that I don't even want to call us working women, that women, because all women are working. They're home or they're out in the community working, but that these trajectories change over time. They change based on the needs of our families. They change based on our interests and our opportunities. And that there's not like one, like this doesn't start and then continue like in the same direction for 20 years. It's changing and adjusting all the time. Yeah. I think that's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such an important, and I think it's sometimes when you're at the point of making the decision, it feels like this is it. Like, am I in this compartment or am I in this compartment? And it's like, really, we're all just constantly changing, and it's not 2 compartments.
Yeah.
It's
100%.
1,000 choices, and that doesn't necessarily make it easier, but, but there
I
are
agree
choices.
With you. I agree with you. I think that, at least, I don't know if it's different for women nowadays, but I think when I was younger, or in the age when I was kind of being confronted with these issues, that it was presented as a dichotomy. And I think it's really false, that it's working women or stay-at-home women. And it's really, it's a false dichotomy. It doesn't exist. And that there's just this spectrum, or, I mean, it could be like Venn diagrams, like people are all over the place in how they overlap life, relationship, work, balances. So yeah, I think that's been interesting for me to look at over my life. The other thing that's sort of interesting, because you were asking about, how do you make these decisions in your life? That sometimes it was just trial and error. Like you try something for a while and it doesn't work, and you're like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, or this is making my life at home difficult, or this is not what I want to do for my work. And you're it's sort of trial and error, and you're feeling it out, and you're adjusting and readjusting based on the needs of your family and on your own needs and on opportunities for your work or your career. So I like that. So I like that we can kind of figure things out, try things out, and that we that it can and that things change over time. Like what I've done for work has changed over time, multiple times over. that I've like done something for a while, and then for some reason, either I've not been interested anymore, or it's not been working with my schedule, and I've turned in another direction and done something else. And they've all been interesting things, but it's been really, I feel really grateful that my job has allowed me to be flexible in that way and to really match what I want to do with my career with what my needs are at home too. What else do I want to say about that? I really feel like kind of the whole work conversation for me is really about juggling. And I've told a couple of friends this before, because often people will say to me, oh, you're doing it all, and wow, like, they look at the outside of my life and kind of construct something that's not actually there.
Right.
And I feel like actually my life is a whole bunch of balls, juggling balls, and I'm like tossing them in the air, and I'm like trying to keep everything going, but balls are dropping, you're trying to pick them back up, and you're going from 3 balls to 8 balls, and then no 8 balls isn't working, you're back down to 3. So I do feel like that's been my journey for like my family and work life, that you can't do it all. I think I wish people would kind of realize that too, that you have to make choices, and that it's okay, and that we should try to support each other in our choices and help each other move in the directions that we need or want to go. I don't know if you know those balls, like if you go to the gym, they have this kind of ball that you can stand on, like a balancing ball.
Yeah,
it's like to help for your balance. And I always look at that and think like, oh, that's like great. That's like a great object lesson for how I feel life is. Like, you're jumping on this thing and you're trying to like make it stay stable. But the reality is you're moving all the time on that. Yeah. You never get to the place where you're perfectly balanced. Well, you may for like a second, right? But then you're overcorrecting. And I feel like that's kind of just like the best analogy for how I feel my life has gone, but for work and home, that is always in flux. It's never quite stable, but I'm always trying to get to that space where it's all like perfectly balanced, and it just doesn't happen without adjustments all the time. I think that's real life. I think that's real. Yeah. And I think, I think sometimes we do each other a disservice by talking about being a mother and work, and not being like on the ground dirty about what really that means,
Oh, yeah. So I'm wondering your perspective. So I'm just thinking, like, becoming a doctor is not a simple thing. Like, like that's a big investment. And it's not something you just do lightly, right? Yeah. And so I'm wondering what your thought is about kind of really investing in a career, and how it enabled you to have the flexibility later on.
Mm-hmm. I wish somebody had given me this advice when I was like 19, but a good friend, Claudia Bushman, gave me some advice like in my 40s, which was like kind of, I guess it wasn't really advice then, it was just confirmation. But she said to me at that time, I really wish women would talk to younger women now about having careers, not just jobs. And her rationale for that was that women that can develop a career can generally make more money, have more financial stability, and have more flexibility than women who don't get that opportunity. And so she said something I thought was brilliant. She said we should be telling, these women we're mentoring and working with in our congregations and in the community to do their very best to try to form a career, because that career will actually help them to make better, to have more opportunities, to be able to stay home if they want, but also to be able to make incomes that will allow them to be more flexible, to work part-time, to take time off work, to work from home. And I thought, man, I wish somebody had said that to me. If young women ask me now what to do, I would say invest everything you can in your education. I don't care. You'll get to a trajectory where you'll make decisions, and you'll make the best decision you can make at the moment. And that decision might be to stay home and have children, maybe to work part-time, and maybe to keep going with your career and have somebody else like take care of children. But you will never regret investing in yourself in that way, just to leave those doors open.
Do you have any closing words or words of advice that could help other people, especially who are trying to make this decision?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking earlier today, like, really how I'd frame that is like, what advice would I give to myself if I could go back now 20 years later, and what would have helped me at that moment and all that decision making? And I think the first thing, because I told that story about at the beginning about being surprised by some people's opinions about about my choices, I would say, first of all, not to worry about what other people, about other people's opinion about your decision. Now that's really hard to do when you're younger, because you're interested in what your community and what your family thinks about what you're doing. But I think maybe a different way of saying that is I would take those opinions with huge grains of salt, and just recognize that it's okay to have a different trajectory than what's expected of you, if that's what you feel is the direction you need to go. So you don't need to, I would tell myself, you don't need to justify your decisions to other people, and that ultimately you know what's best for you and your family, and just follow your heart and follow your heart on those things. So follow your heart and your mind too. Your mind will help you.
Yeah.
So I want to make a small addition to that experience I had when I was confronted with this woman who was very upset about my decision to go into medical school. I really think we should be mindful of the strength that we draw from our communities, but also don't let our communities constrain us in ways that they shouldn't.
Right.
So I think sometimes those constraints, those ideas, we constrain ourselves with them rather than to see that those ideas are one way of thinking of something, but not necessarily the only way. Yeah. I think if I were going back to give advice to my younger self, I would just say, think big, and don't, you can see that there are challenges ahead, but think outside the box and think big. And recognize that you're not in a box. You're not trapped in a one way of being, and that the diversity of choices that women make is amazing, and that you should feel excited to be part of that diversity, whatever that looks like for you. And what else would I give advice to myself now is I would tell my younger self to look for mentors and champions, to look for people. We talked at the beginning a bit about you look for people who kind of support your point of view, and I actually think you should look for people who can champion what you're doing and who can model what you hope to do, and look at what they've done well and things that they have regretted doing, and learn from those things. So we do need mentors. I think back to those two, academic professional women that were in my church congregation, and I bless them every day that they just opened a space for me to be able to think about other possibilities for me, other than the traditional one that I was hearing, which was that all women had a single path, that there was a single path that was kind of expected. And not to say, I want to back up on that, not to say that that's a wrong path, because it's totally not. Right, I think if women have that opportunity and that's their desire and wish, then we should also support them in their capacity to do that. It was just not the trajectory that was for me.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your experience building your family and succeeding as a physician. And thank you, audience, for listening. You can connect with me and find show notes at themomspectrum.com. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with a friend. Next week, join us to hear from Erin Hooley, a mom and founder of multi-million-dollar children's clothing lines Bailey's Blossoms and Peyton Bree.